Welcome back to Disturbed Reality. The internet is a strange, fascinating, and sometimes downright bewildering place. In one moment, you're scrolling through a feed filled with adorable cat videos, fluffy little creatures tumbling off couches, getting startled by cucumbers, or meowing dramatically for snacks they absolutely don't need. Maybe you're laughing at the latest meme taking over your timeline, or watching some ridiculously wholesome clip that restores your faith in humanity for a solid 10 seconds. It feels light, harmless, entertaining, and often comforting. But then, just with a couple of clicks, everything changes. Because the same internet that brings us cute cats and wholesome videos also holds some of the darkest and most disturbing corners imaginable. Behind certain links, hidden subforums, or old, half-forgotten sites lie videos and stories that most people probably wish they could unsee. Content created not to entertain, but to shock, unsettle, or reveal realities far more uncomfortable than anything we encounter in our usual daily scroll. The contrast is jarring. On one side of the internet feels like a warm hug, and the other can feel like staring into the abyss. And as always, that strange duality is exactly what today's video is about. Taking a step into that shadowy side, not to glorify it or sensationalize it, but to understand it the best we can. Because whether we like it or not, the darker parts of the online world exist, and they've shaped internet culture in ways many people don't even realise. Ultimately, the internet is like a vast ocean. On the surface, it's bright and sparkly, filled with viral dances, cooking hacks, and people arguing passionately over which superhero would win a fight. But deep below those waves, there are forgotten wrecks, murky mysteries, and things that most people don't dare look at directly. And like any explorer, we're shining a small flashlight into the darkness, not to dwell there, but to understand what's down there and why it exists. But nevertheless, what happens in the actual videos? Number 1. Conflict cannibalism. For this clip, we need a little backstory on the brutal Sudan civil war. The conflict officially began on the 15th of April 2023, when open clashes broke out in Khartoum between two rival military forces, the regular Sudanese Armed Forces SAF, led by General Abdel Fattah el-Burhan, and the paramilitary Rapid Forces RSF, commanded by General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, better known as Hemedti. At its heart, this was a power struggle. After the ousting of longtime ruler Omar al-Bashir in 2019, Sudan entered a fragile transition towards civilian rule. But that transition never fully stabilised, and behind the scenes tensions between Burhan and Hemedti kept simmering. One of the biggest sticking points was the planned integration of the RSF into the regular army, SAF. That was supposed to bring paramilitary forces under government control, but the RSF resisted. For Hemedti and his supporters, this integration threatened not only just military autonomy, but also his access to vast economic powers, especially gold. Over the years, the RSF had built a financial empire, controlling gold mining, smuggling networks, and other profitable operations. So on one side you had the SAF wanting to consolidate control, and on the other, the RSF fiercely defending its independence. That tension was a major spark. Sudan's broader economic crises made everything worse. The country was already reeling from debt, hyperinflation, and sanctions. Resources like land, water, and especially gold became hotly contested. The RSF's grip on gold mines gave it enormous leverage. Meanwhile, the rest of the military establishment saw a fight not only for power, but who controls Sudan's wealth. Another big factor is long-standing ethnic tensions and marginalisation. The RSF has roots in Janjaweed militias from Darfur, groups notorious for brutality against non-Arab communities like the Mazalids. That history has created layers of mistrust. For many communities, the war isn't about generals, it's about existential fears, reprisal, and deeply entrenched divisions. Sudan's political institutions have been fragile for a number of years. After Bashir's fall in 2019, the transitional government never fully took root. In 2021, a military coup dissolved the transitional arrangement, reigniting the simmering rivalries between the SAF and RSF. Without strong civilian leadership, the two generals increasingly saw Sudan's future as a winner-takes-all game. External players have also fueled the conflict. Different regional powers across the globe are backing one side or the other, often motivated by access to resources, strategic influence, or ideological leverage. Some countries reportedly see Sudan's gold and trade routes as a prize, and have made investments that deepen the war's stakes. So to sum up, the 2023 Sudan Civil War didn't just come out of nowhere, it exploded because of a power struggle between two military leaders, a battle over economic resources, especially gold, long-standing ethnic tensions, political instability and strong foreign interference. This layered crisis has created a brutal and all-encompassing war, with consequences that go far beyond the battlefield, and that's what makes it so dangerous and devastating for Sudan. In fact, some consider Sudan in 2025 to be the most dangerous country in the world. When it comes to the ongoing situation in Sudan, as you can imagine, there's been some utterly horrific videos to come out of the conflict, though, truth be told, the vast majority of it is exactly what you would expect from a war zone. Many of the recorded war crimes are incidents such as mass executions where multiple people will be lined up before being gunned down with high-powered assault rifles. There are also some horrific aftermath videos of explosions and things of that nature that are incredibly hard to watch. Though one aspect of the war, however, that is rarely touched upon is the methods of psychological warfare that the participating sides and factions use, one of which being cannibalism. Although not widespread, there have been reports of cannibalism being used in the Sudan conflict, as ultimately, cannibalism is an effective way and method to instill fear among your enemies. Now, a clip that I've been aware of for several months may indicate that cannibalism may be being used as a weapon in Sudan. I say maybe because although the video is real, there's always the possibility that the clip may be from another country in Africa, but I've seen this one being attributed to Sudan. Regardless, as for the clip in question, it's exactly 1 minute in length, and it's gruesome and bizarre. The video has been shot during the day. As you play the video, you are met with gore immediately. You see a man dressed in combat fatigue, kneeling over the corpse of a person. I can't make out whether the victim is a male or female due to the carnage. The victim's brain has been blown out. They've been shot in the head. You literally see a big clump of a brain next to the corpse. The man in combat fatigue has totally opened up the victim's torso, exposing all of the organs, the guts, the intestines and whatnot. He's using a machete to further open up the body cavity, before he then slices under the ribs with his blade. He then rummages around in the body cavity for a while, before pulling at an organ. He then takes his knife and he begins to surgically slice away at it. I think he was targeting the liver, but again it's hard to tell due to the carnage. The video then takes a jump cut, and it's bizarre. At this stage, you are met with a new scene. It opens up with a top-down view of a pot with red liquid in it. Sitting next to the pot is a man who is also hunched over a small fire, and you see that he is carrying a severed hand. He then makes a movement towards the fire, and he pulls off a makeshift skewer that is cooking human flesh over the open flames. After showing the person filming what he is cooking, he then places his hand in the pot with the red liquid, and he then pulls out a human heart. He shows it gleefully to the camera. The person filming then points the camera down at his own pockets, and he pulls out a cigarette packet, and inside the packet is a severed human finger. At this point, the person filming resumes focus on the man sitting near the fire, and again he can be seen holding the skewer with the human flesh on it over the flames. It looks like they're cooking themselves up a macabre feast. The video in general is extremely gruesome, but more than anything, it's just incredibly bizarre. Number 2. Boko Haram Brutality. For this clip, we first need to explore one of the most troubling and enduring security crises in modern Africa, That being the ongoing brutality of Boko Haram in Nigeria, and why even in 2025, the situation looks painfully bleak. Boko Haram, whose name is often translated as Western education is forbidden, is one of the deadliest extremist groups in the world. They first emerged in the early 2000s in northeastern Nigeria, claiming to fight against moral corruption and promote their own rigid worldview. But what quickly followed was a campaign of violence that has displaced millions, destabilized entire regions, and caused immeasurable suffering. Boko Haram's brutality has never ever been subtle. Throughout the past decade or so, the group has carried out kidnappings, raids on villages, attacks on markets, schools and places of worship. Their goal? Simply to instill fear, expand control, and disrupt any sense of normalcy. Families have been forced to flee in the middle of the night. Many communities across Borno, Yobe and Amadawa states live under the constant threat of attack. One of the most infamous incidents was the 2014 Chibok schoolgirl kidnapping that captured global attention. But the lesser-known reality is that such abductions have continued for years, often targeting rural Christian communities where there is little protection and almost no media coverage. By the late 2010s, Boko Haram fractured into different factions, including the ISWAP, the Islamic State West Africa province. Instead of weakening the threat, this split made things worse. ISWAP became more organised, more strategic, and more deeply tied to global extremist networks. The result has been a more complicated conflict with multiple groups competing for influence, territory, and recruits. Fast forwards to 2025 and Nigeria still struggles to contain the crises. Why? There are several reasons. Firstly, the vast terrain of the northeast, from the Sambisa forest to Lake Chad, provides natural hiding places that are incredibly hard for security forces to patrol effectively. Second would be poverty and unemployment and lack of basic education that continues to make many young people vulnerable to recruitment. Extremist groups exploit these conditions, offering money or a sense of belonging where the government has failed to provide opportunities. Thirdly, despite years of military efforts, equipment shortages, corruption and low morale hinder Nigeria's ability to maintain long-term security gains. Villages cleared one month are sometimes attacked again the next. And finally, millions of displaced people remain in overcrowded camps, unable to return home. Without stability, the cycle of fear, dependency and vulnerability continues. So in 2025, the crisis remains one of the world's most persistent humanitarian emergencies, though it receives little attention from mainstream media, though the topic has started to gain more traction on social media in recent months. Notably, one of the main talking points in regards to Boko Haram is their targeting of Christians and local minority religious groups in the northern region of Nigeria. Primarily, they are targeted as they are viewed, according to their ideology, as non-believers or apostates. In the last couple of weeks, I was sent a clip that was making the rounds on Twitter of a recent execution that indeed took place in the northern part of Nigeria, perpetrated by Boko Haram on a member of the Christian faith. Now, there is very little backstory behind the clip, but apparently the man was abducted from a rural community and was then moved to a remote location before he was then executed. There's literally no further information behind this clip, or more importantly, there's no more information describing on who the victim was, what role he played in his community, or why he in particular was targeted. The video in question is very short, and it's around 36 seconds in length. The video has been shot during daytime in the middle of a grassy meadow. The quality of the footage is poor. You could mistake it for something filmed in the mid-2000s. In the video you see the captive, a man who is dressed in all white, and he is sitting on the grassy ground with his hands tied behind his back. Surrounding the victim are the terrorists, one of which is filming, and there are at least 3 others that you see in frame at certain points in the video. One is seemingly carrying an assault rifle, though the terrorist standing closest to the victim has a bladed weapon. I believe it's called a panga, which is essentially a different variation of a basic machete. It's more or less a heavy-duty machete designed for thicker overgrowth. You see the man carrying the panga lift the blade above his head as the victim is sitting down, and he just looks at the ground, totally hopeless. By sitting like this, he essentially gives up the back of his neck, and is open to be hit with the blade. And that's exactly what happens. The panga-wielding terrorist drives the blade down onto the back of the neck, and in just one hit, the damage is insane. The victim drops immediately to the ground and his spine has been totally severed. It actually sounds like you hear the spine crunch as this happens. It instantly turns the victim's lights out. The captive falls to the ground, and you see that his head is essentially now held onto his body by only the skin and flesh at the front of the neck. Because of this, the victim's head basically folds downwards and faces directly at his own chest. It's hard to explain. Regardless, once the victim drops, a second man is then seen entering shot, also carrying a machete or a panga, and he hacks through the remaining skin and flesh holding the head onto the body, and he makes short work of this with a few hits with the blade. A person in the background can be heard chanting Allahu Akbar in a very nonchalant manner. One of the killers then kicks the head, before the person filming then gets a closer view of the carnage. Due to the poor quality of the footage, you don't really see much, aside from a blurry, bloody mess. The killers then again nonchalantly talk amongst themselves as the video then ends. Although short, the casual manner in which the murderers carried out this task was pretty shocking to say the least, and it truly highlights how far gone they are, a total loss of their humanity. Number 3. Don't steal. Since 2018, Ethiopia has been torn by a series of overlapping conflicts between government forces and regional militias, between different ethnic communities, and between rebel groups and the state. What began as separate insurgencies and regional tensions has spiraled into one of the most serious humanitarian crises in recent history. Even though a formal ceasefire was agreed in late 2022 in the north, the violence has not ended. Instead, killings, mass displacements, arbitrary arrests and attacks on civilians continue, especially in regions such as the Amhara region, the Tigray region, and the Oromia region. What makes Ethiopia's crises especially brutal is not just the fighting, but the scale and nature of the atrocities. Security forces, including the Ethiopian National Defense Force, ENDF, have been accused of extrajudicial killings, torture, indiscriminate attacks with drones, and heavy weapons on civilian areas, and widespread destruction of hospitals and aid infrastructure. In one harrowing case, the Marari massacre in January 2024, troops reportedly executed between 50 and 100 civilians, men, women, and even the elderly, in what survivors described as door-to-door killings in revenge for a militia attack. Bullets to the head, bodies left in the streets, no mercy. Violence has also been used as a weapon of war. In the north, numerous reports document mass forced pregnancy, sexual torture, and even deliberate attempts to inflict long-term harm, including the insertion of foreign objects. Survivors range from young girls to elderly women. These crimes amount to war crimes, and according to serious international reports, may constitute genocide or crimes against humanity. Entire communities have been forcibly displaced, their homes destroyed, and their farmlands lost. Populations have been starved, with access to humanitarian aid reportedly being blocked. In many cases, no accountability has followed. The victims aren't fighters, they are ordinary people, mothers and fathers, children and the elderly. Thousands are internally displaced, entire towns lie empty, their inhabitants gone, their livelihoods totally destroyed. Journalists, human rights defenders and ordinary citizens who speak out, many of which have been arbitrarily detained, disappeared or forced into silence. Media freedom has been crushed in several regions. Medical workers, aid organisations, humanitarian convoys have themselves become targets. Ambulances have been attacked, hospitals looted, meaning even those who survive violence may not survive its aftermath. Despite mounting evidence of war crimes and crimes against humanity, justice sadly remains elusive, and the issues plaguing Ethiopia remain underreported in mainstream media. Now, let's talk about a video that perfectly encapsulates the brutality that is often enacted upon regular civilians in the country of Ethiopia. According to some sources, the perpetrators in the video in question were members of the army, and the victim was just a regular citizen. I have read in places that the gruesome torture was a punishment for theft, but I have not been able to verify this, but given the punishment, this does make sense. The video itself also comes from the Amhara region, which as previously stated is plagued with violence often caused by the military. The video in question is exactly 1 minute and 33 seconds in length. The clip has been shot during daylight hours, and the setting is that of a small rural desert village. As you play the video, you are immediately met with barbarity. In the clip, you see the victim, a man, who is kneeling down on the ground, and you see that his arm is resting on a rock. Now the rock is already covered in blood, indicating that the torture started way before filming commenced. Aside from the person filming, there are at least 2 other perpetrators at the scene, both of which are wearing camo fatigue, indicating that they may indeed be from the military. One is carrying what looks to be an assault rifle, and the other is carrying what can only be described as a bushcraft-style scythe. Both of the army men pose for the camera for a few seconds. After a few more seconds go by, the person with the scythe lines the tip of the blade up with the victim's arm where blood is already pouring out from, and he then brings the scythe down onto the man's arm, the blade completely penetrating into the flesh. The captive pulls his arm away out of instinct and pain, but it's at this point you realise the extent of the damage. The victim's bones about halfway up his forearm have completely snapped, making his arm flop around like a piece of rubber. I think prior to recording they may have used one of the rocks in the scene to break the arm, as the tool that they are using doesn't look capable. Regardless, they force the victim to again place his broken and lacerated arm back onto the rock, which he does. You hear the captive do his best not to scream or freak out, but he does let out some light groans of pain intermittently. The military man again hits the man's arm with the tip of a scythe blade, and it cuts through more flesh, and more blood stains the rock where the captive's arm is resting. You also see the white of his bone protrude from his wound for a split second. At this point, the soldier takes the scythe, and it seems that he then tries to use the backside of the blade to cut through the man's flesh to remove his arm. The camera, however, pans down as this begins. All you hear are the grunts of pain from the captive, and the scraping and scratching sounds from the scythe. Out of nowhere, the soldiers say something to the captive. The victim then gets up and he's allowed to leave and walk back to his village, which you can now see in the background of the video. As the man walks off slowly, you see his arm dangling by some remaining skin and a few strands of flesh, and blood is leaking out profusely. The man then hurries off to get away from his attackers, but he's moving carefully. It looks like he's scared that if he moves too quickly, the remaining strands of skin and flesh holding his lower arm will break and he will totally lose it. In reality, he would have lost his arm at this point regardless, there's no saving it. The quality of the actual footage is poor, it has to be said, but you see more than enough and it's very graphic. But anyway, that is the video. I hope you enjoyed it if you can enjoy this sort of content. I thought I'd bring you some clips from different parts of the world that we don't usually cover. As always guys, thank you for the support, it's much appreciated. Links to my other social medias will be in the pinned comment. I am still going to make that commentary channel that I was talking about, but as of right now my brain isn't coming up with a good enough name that I'm happy with, so yeah, I'm kind of stuck on that, believe it or not. But yeah, as always guys, thanks for the support, it's much appreciated. And as always, stay safe, and I'll catch you on the next one.